People avoided venturing too deep into the Appalachian forests. There were trails that disappeared into the shadows of ancient trees, paths where things happened that were far darker than the stories told around campfires. James Archer didn't believe in such superstitions. At 28, he was an ambitious nature photographer, known for exploring the most isolated places and capturing hauntingly beautiful landscapes. His social media followers loved his eerie, abandoned location photography. This time, he planned to spend a few days alone in the deep woods, compiling an album titled Nature Unseen by Man. He packed his gear meticulously: extra batteries, a GPS device, a satellite phone. He knew that going alone was risky, but that was part of the thrill. He didn't need a guide or a group. They would only ruin the raw experience. At a gas station near the town's outskirts, an old man approached him. "Where exactly are you headed, son?" the man asked, his voice rough with age. James unfolded his map and pointed at his planned route. The old man's face darkened. "Don't go there," he muttered. "That's near the old hunting cabin. That place is cursed." James smirked, amused. "I love a good ghost story. What happened there?" The man averted his gaze. "It's not a story. It's real." James thanked him and went on his way. He had heard such warnings before. Tales of missing hikers, ancient curses, whispered warnings from old-timers. It only made the journey more enticing. The first day passed without trouble. He hiked for hours, capturing breathtaking shots of untouched wilderness. He camped by an old riverbed, cooked a simple meal, and admired the vast silence around him. But by the second day, something changed. The air felt heavier. The wind shifted unpredictably. Shadows seemed to stretch unnaturally between the trees. And then came the feeling that someone or something was watching him. That night, James woke to a strange sound, a whisper. "Can you see me?" James's pulse quickened. He listened, unsure if he was dreaming. The whisper came again, distant yet uncomfortably close. Gripping his flashlight, he hesitated before unzipping his tent and peeking outside. There was no one there, but the trees around his camp had changed. Carved into their bark were strange symbols, spirals, runes, and countless eye-shaped engravings. Some were fresh, as if someone had scratched them only hours before. A chill ran through him. The eyes on the trees, they seemed to be staring back. He didn't sleep for the rest of the night. By the third day, James reached the abandoned hunting cabin. The structure was decayed, its wooden beams rotting, its windows shattered. An old X was scratched onto the door. Inside, the walls were covered in thousands of eye carvings. At first, he thought they were just more strange symbols. But then, as he shined his flashlight over them, the eyes blinked. His breath hitched. His mind screamed at him to run, but his legs refused to move. The carvings weren't just etched into the wood. They were alive. He lifted his camera, trembling, and clicked the shutter. That's when he heard it. A deep, slow breath right behind him. James felt his body go numb. He didn't want to turn around. He couldn't. But an unseen force compelled him. He turned, and it was there. A humanoid figure stood in the shadows of the cabin. Its entire body was made of shifting, blinking eyes. Some of them were human, some were animalistic, but all of them were looking directly at him. Then, inside his head, a voice whispered, "Now, you see." Darkness consumed him. James Archer was never seen again. Months later, a search team found the cabin. Inside, they found nothing, but on the ground just outside the door, they found his camera. The last photo on it was a blurred, nightmarish image of a figure covered in hundreds of glowing eyes. Since then, travelers in those woods have reported an eerie sensation, the feeling of being watched. Liam Foster was a seasoned camper. At 36, he had spent years escaping the noise of the city by heading deep into the wilderness, setting up camp in isolated spots, and enjoying the solitude. He had encountered wild animals, unpredictable weather, and rough terrain, but nothing had ever shaken him like what he experienced on that trip. This time, his destination was Willamette National Forest in Oregon. It was vast, remote, and dense with towering pine trees, a perfect place to disconnect from civilization. He packed his gear, mapped out his route, and hiked for 6 hours until he reached a secluded clearing. The first night was peaceful. He built a fire, cooked his meal, and drifted off to sleep under a clear, starry sky. But on the second night, he realized he wasn't alone. It was just past midnight. Liam sat by the dying embers of his campfire, reading a book, when he heard it. A whisper. It was faint, almost lost in the rustling of the trees, but the moment he focused on it, he realized something terrifying. There was no wind. The forest had gone deathly silent. No crickets, no rustling leaves, no distant calls of animals. Then he heard it again. Not a whisper this time, a distant, breathy scream. Liam slowly stood up, gripping his flashlight. The sound came from just beyond the edge of his campsite. He hesitated for a moment before finally raising the light and pointing it toward the trees. And then something moved. A shadow, a tall, thin figure, darted behind a tree. Liam's pulse skyrocketed. He wasn't sure what he had just seen, but it was fast, too fast. And its limbs, they didn't move like a normal person's. Then, behind him, another sound. Bare footsteps. Slow, deliberate, right behind his tent. The realization hit him like ice water. He wasn't being watched by just one thing. Liam backed toward his tent, gripping the knife at his waist. His instincts screamed at him to run, but where? Into the trees, toward the thing he had just seen. Instead, he dove into the tent and zipped it up, his breath ragged. For a few moments, there was only silence. Then, breathing, right outside, shallow, slow, controlled. Someone or something was standing just inches away. Liam held his breath, squeezing his knife so hard his knuckles turned white. Then, the zipper on his tent began to slide down. His mind screamed. His body refused to move. Whatever was out there was coming in. In a surge of blind panic, Liam lunged forward, knife in hand, and tore out of the tent. But outside, there was nothing. No one. Only footprints. Bare, child-sized footprints, pressed deep into the dirt. But there was something horribly wrong with them. The toes pointed backward. Liam's stomach lurched. His body went cold. His mind refused to accept what he was seeing. Then, somewhere in the trees, he heard it. A low, inhuman scream, and just beyond his vision, something white moved. A figure, tall, thin, standing completely still. It had no face. Its hands slowly rose into the air, and then it shrieked. Liam ran harder than he ever had in his life. Ran until his vision blurred, until his lungs felt like they would burst. The last thing he remembered before passing out was the feeling of something breathing down his neck. Days later, a group of hikers found Liam collapsed near a riverbank. He was barefoot. His legs were covered in mud up to his knees. His arms had deep, crescent-shaped scratches, as if something had gripped him tightly. He was physically unharmed. No broken bones, no bruises. But his mind, something inside him, had changed. Authorities searched the area where he had camped, but found nothing. No tent, no supplies. It was as if his camp had never existed. And the strangest part? A long-forgotten burial site for children had been discovered not far from where Liam was found. Some say the spirits of those lost children still wander the forest, searching for the living. And Liam? He never camped again. But sometimes, even in the safety of his home, he still swears he can hear it. The breath, just outside his window.